Colin McNamara, Chief Cloud Architect for Nexus. I blog at colinmcnamara.com and at Colin McNamara on Twitter.
I'm Jennifer Huber, Mobility Solutions Architect. I tweet at Jennifer Lucille, and my website is jenniferlucille.com.
Tony Mattke, Network Engineer, routerjockey.com.
Samuel Clements on Twitter at Samuel_Clements, sc-wifi.com.
Frank Owen, IT Manager. I tweet at fowen, and my website is techvirtuoso.com.
Jennifer Lynn, Lead Product Management at Juniper. Joined Juniper a few months back with the Contrail acquisition.
Bob Muglia, Juniper Networks. I run the Software Solutions Group, and I admit I'm a neophyte blogger, but I've done it.
Aruna, Ravichandran. I lead product marketing at Juniper, both in Bob's organization. I tweet extensively, and I'm at Aruna13.
Calvin Chai, Data Center Marketing at Juniper. I'm at Chachi04.
I'm Michael Leonard, Data Center Marketing at Juniper. I'm Michael C. Leonard on Twitter, and I post a data center blog on forums.juniper.net.
Robert Novak, Deep Generalist. I do everything with sales. My blog is rscs11.com, and I'm Gallifrey on Twitter.
Hi, I'm Mrs. Y. Also, Mrs. Y is Y on Twitter. I have a podcast, healthyparanoia.net, and I'm also president of the Ivan Pepelnjak fan club.
Which would be me. So I'm going to introduce myself, and I'm Chief Technology Advisor at New Data Communication. And you can follow me at iOS and I have my blog at iOSpace.net. Thank you.
And my name is Jason Edelman. I blog at jedelman.com, and on Twitter I am jedelman8.
We're now some amount of time into this SDN journey and focusing on how software-defined networking will really transition the networking experience for customers. We do really think this is very real. We think it's going to have a very significant impact. You know, we spent a lot of time last year. We were silent all last year, very, very quiet. Might have even said we were in stealth mode and trying to look at our strategy. We came out fairly clearly, I hope, in early January, mid-January, where we talked at our partner conference about what our overall strategy is, where we talked about 6 principles, which I thought was really important, by the way, because nobody was clear on what SDN was, and in outlining principles, it just seemed like a way of explaining SDN that resonated with people, and the feedback we've gotten from customers has been pretty much reaffirmed that. You know, a 4-step roadmap and then one new business model. And each of those things are pretty important. You need what is the darn thing and why is it important? How do you get there? A roadmap as to how do you get there? And then it is a major change in the business model. So we had the one new business model which we articulated in January. We introduced in March, late February, early March, at Mobile World Congress, a set of services that we've been bringing out inside this architecture, and talked about that. It's kind of the second step in the architecture. And then the third thing today, this week, you know, we really wanted to talk about our controller architecture, the trends in the industry. You know, I decided this morning to go with in my talk, my keynote this morning, to focus in on the industry direction in SDN that we perceived, which started out, and I sort of characterized this as a reactive end-to-end architecture with the separation of the control plane and the data plane and the centralization of the control plane, and how we felt that broadly the industry was moving to more of a proactive overlay architecture which controlled the endpoints, typically vSwitches, potentially a gateway, and then what that meant. And we talked about how that worked in the context of the controller that we're bringing out and its connection to OpenStack, etc. 22 minutes this morning. It wasn't an enormous amount of time to cover all that much. I don't think I could have spoken a whole lot faster than I did, and I've gotten the feedback that maybe that I perhaps spoke a little too fast. But we tried to cover a whole lot of ground in that period of time, and really lay out some industry challenges and talk about where we thought the industry was going. And so that kind of gives you a context of getting us to today. You know, we did say that our controller is in beta and will be out in the second half of this year. I may sort of leave it at that and not say any more, but then open it up to ask and answer and go anywhere you guys want to go. And by the way, Jennifer runs PLM for our Contrail effort, so she's very much in the middle of everything we're doing with Contrail. And Aruna is really focused on our broad marketing for all software with a major focus on SDN.
Okay, crickets, I'll break it. I'll break the silence, okay.
We're all waiting for you.
I'm so quiet. No. Oh, actually, I haven't really formulated a good
You guys aren't
question.
usually quiet.
What's that?
You're not usually quiet. I'm not used to being quiet. So.
Oh, no. I got to bed at 4 last night. No, I think that, I think we actually had a interesting start of a conversation in the door coming in, which is about sourcing talent. And there's an extension of the conversation we had in the last session. As our networks or systems or storage become software defined, there's a new suite of both tools that are used by our engineers, skills that they need to use those tools, and methodologies to manage the deployment and support of them that are kind of new to our customer base, or our customer base, or the engineering, network engineering as a whole. We got a discussion about talent sourcing, and I think in the context of a manufacturer like Juniper, you maintain certification programs. You have a boundary layer between your enterprise product or your for-pay products and the open source tools that consume them or use them or integrate with them. I'd ask an open-ended question. We can focus it down. What is Juniper doing to foster the creation of skill sets and tools necessary to succeed in the SDM role?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll start, and then maybe you can add some things. Which I think the first thing I'd say is that we're still fairly early in this, and one of the things we've been focusing on is making sure we are working with the communities that are building the set of open source services and tools like OpenStack as an example, to ensure that what we're doing integrates well with that. We are still really early in terms of broad education of our customer base and even our partner base in order to be able to get them to roll all these things out. It is a new skill set for the networking industry that will be required. Now, the benefit of this, the positive thing about this, is that it's largely leveraging the skill sets that exist in the virtualization community, the software virtualization community, but they're going through a transition too to go to private clouds, right? That because a lot of these things are running as a part of the virtual machines, they're run and administered in some senses similarly to what other things are run. There is some leverage that can be gotten there, but it still is a transition that I think even those industries are going through because of the transition to private clouds.
Yeah, I think it's a broader question, maybe gets to human resource capital, et cetera. I mean, if you look at, especially in Silicon Valley, good engineering talent, a lot of these folks want to actively cross-train themselves, and at least in Contrail, many of the folks had actually left the networking industry and were at, Facebook and Google and Microsoft Azure, and, both from a customer perspective, where essentially the organizations were changing quite rapidly, and in many cases they were responsible, yes, for network architecture, but also working very closely with the online applications teams or the gaming teams or whatever it is, and those types of new applications are the things that it's almost unfortunately a fork in the road sometimes, where if an engineer needs to essentially be fixing bugs in an operating system that was defined 20 years ago and never got to keep pace with what's happening in Linux or the open source community, they're actually feeling like they're doing themselves a really big disservice. So unfortunately, a lot of the rock star engineers, in order to keep them interested in what's going on as this convergence in IT and applications happens, they're going to do it on their own on the side. They're retooling themselves with Python and Bash and Node.js or whatever it is, and bringing that back into essentially a broader discussion, so we can have discussions like what Bob presented this morning in terms of, okay, but that's nice. How do we essentially move this broader ship forward on behalf of the industry, where we're taking best practices from what many of the emerging companies are doing and bringing that back in a way that our large enterprise and carrier customers can consume?
Well, you brought up, you brought up an aspect of the DevOps movement.
Yep.
Right. Of a very application-centric alignment of IT operations and software development teams, and the merging of software development methodologies into operations. Part of that is tools that are commonly used. Yes. Jenkins or one of the other 40 continuous integration systems, automated regression testings of the features and functions that you define in your network. The ability to use test-driven development, where if you're going to write a BGP peer, you'll write a test to validate that it peered, and that will live forever in your infrastructure. What is Juniper doing to integrate their products into those tool sets and test-driven methodologies?
Well, let me just be clear. There's sort of two dimensions to the question as I understood it. One was the first one was about how are we helping our customers' infrastructures evolve in the networking space, and what can we do there. The second then is that as we think about what we're building ourselves, which is kind of what Jennifer took on, as we think about what we're building ourselves, how is that transitioned as we begin to build products outside of the embedded Junos operating system environment. If you look at our resources historically, our software engineering resources, 90% of it was on Junos. And now we're moving in a shift where more and more of those engineers are writing in the Linux environment, using this set of continuous software development tools and those sorts of approaches. If you look at what the Condrail team has done and what our Junos V App Engine team is doing with the service chaining work, it's all built on modern software engineering principles that embrace these different techniques in terms of building software and testing software and validating it, making sure we have the underlying test cases all defined.
So are you going to release those test cases to your customer base?
In some cases, yeah, and in some cases we're taking their test cases and bringing them into us, and we're trying to do both. Yeah. Some of them are operated at a component level that makes no sense to release, but the system test pieces can make sense.
I know the last time the Tech Build, they had a discussion, you guys, you were demonstrating, is it Jeremy Schulman?
Yes.
Sorry, yeah. He was showing his Puppet integration, and I'm really, I personally am pleased to see that Juniper supporting, individuals contributing to open source. I think he contributed to NetDev for Puppet, and the tail end of those delivery pipelines. And there's actually a discussion about integrating Sphere with Maven and Jenkins CI to be able to integrate and utilize investments you've already made in software modeling in the distributed system. And the investments you and your employees are making into DevOps tool sets of getting software defined or checking configs into source code and having it end up on your devices, but integrating Sphere into those systems. Do you think come of that?
I don't know that discussion. I think that was probably with Jeremy. But
that one. So
there's a lot of people in the room here. I recognize some faces that are in there.
So
I'm not sure I put anyone on the spot. I mean, you guys have been moving the ball forward, so it's interesting hearing what you're doing.
Yeah, so my name is Siva, Mandalam, and I'm with Juniper Network.
First name again?
Siva.
Siva, thank
you. So we're working with the third-party tools from an automation perspective to really build a gap, close the gap, really, from the perspective of actually how the two organizations are going to be collaborating inside the context of data centers. Right. So Puppet's actually, like Jeremy demonstrated in the Bay Area user group, it's actually one example in terms of how you can achieve that. We support that with the EX switches today. Idea for us going down the time axis to really be able to support that across the portfolio of switches, especially the newer switches. And also really expand it out, not just the DevOps community from an apps core, also to work with Chef, multiple tools, right?
It's going to have to.
So really the idea is to make sure that we are working there, leverage the capabilities of Junos programmability, and really start to actually work with a lot of these vendors which are really going to be useful.
Well, the reason I ask is because, at least in my opinion, it could be totally wrong half the time, but you have to be able to utilize SDN in a meaningful way in your networks. You have to control your distributed systems via software development tools.
That's right.
Juno is being extensible, BSD based. It's kind of waiting to happen. Be really interested. Hopefully, I'm speaking as a member of a community, not just an outlier of seeing you guys release further integrations. Allow us to get
You'll see us continue to do that, and I think one of the opportunities that we have with this move to SDN and some of these new infrastructures that are built outside of the Junos world is the ability, frankly, to attract a different set of developers into the environment. It opens the world. There's a relatively incestuous group of networking developers that run around the valley, and they have deep understanding of the networking world, but they are not necessarily steeped in building cloud infrastructure and cloud-based services. And one of the opportunities that we find pretty exciting as we go forward with this is, frankly, to attract a different set of folks. Particularly folks that are coming out of college.
And they could use APIs and really be able to actually extend the Junos beyond what we offer, right? And that could actually drive feature development actually for us in the new data center.
Do you see yourself extending a certification program around programmability?
Yeah, I mean, programmability and also the new SDN, I mean, both, I think, the new SDN stuff.
And I think you have a big essential public relations problem outside of Silicon Valley. I mean, when I hear talk, I keep hearing SDN, and you'll have to forgive me, I ride the security short bus, but it's like, it just doesn't seem relevant outside this bubble world of, Silicon Valley. And, because most of us are in, I mean, even, I worked at a, pretty fairly big financial services provider. This guy didn't know what SDN was. I walked into a CISO's office who managed the entire network, and I'm like, SDN. No, what's that?
Check out Goldman, though. They one regular engineer learned a little bit.
I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's just not, there's a disconnect with the schmoes out in the field, the guys in the daily grind, and there's an essential shift, intellectual paradigm shift that needs to happen, and it's just not occurring, where there's fear. They're literally afraid that their jobs are going to change, that the business model is going to change.
It is.
And right.
I think it depends on where you're talking. If you're talking in the C-suite, I don't agree with you because they.
No, there is. I saw a C-level person who was asking questions that were answered 6 years ago about VMware virtual networking. They're like, well, I don't know if that virtualized networking is going to work. And you're like, dude, they had that argument, you lost.
But put it in but you got to put it in the context. By the way, but you got to put it in the context of you. If you look in the view of only in the network, you're absolutely correct. But if you look in the view of the shift in software development from SDLC to Agile, there's a whole new way of creating high quality code in a very short manner, which is creating a competitive differentiator. Best Buy published they're saying $500,000 in iteration right now by moving to Agile software development methodologies. Now these tools track every dependency. They have some neat things about always checking in useful code that works. Now the thing is, when you think about your network of systems of storage, it's one shared dependency across all your applications stacks. But we don't manage it. We don't map them. We don't understand how network functions actually interact with every release. So while your CEO may not understand why SDN is important to him, he understands why his VP of application development is now shipping code in 2 weeks instead of 2 years. And that driver is absolutely there.
That conversation's not even there. I mean, you're.
I think conversation in Minnesota.
I do think it depends on who you're talking to. I mean, I know that when we talk to people about, when I go out and I chat with customers, both enterprise customers and service provider customers, they have heard of SDN. They are still generally speaking confused about what it means.
Yeah.
Now,
Yes.
what they will say, and you hear this again and again, is here is the business challenge at the C-suite level, right? Here's the business challenge I have. And I think the kind of thing that I hear is that I need to deploy applications more rapidly than I am able to do so today. Now, the development has been traditionally a bottleneck with methodologies like Agile. They're starting to be able to be much more effective in that, but their infrastructure still lags behind.
That's why they use Amazon.
That's right.
That's the $1 billion a year growth in Amazon is the shift in application development.
Does anyone want my rant on why infrastructure lags behind?
Oh, yes, please.
No, it's very simple because everyone has shifted all of their problems into our own labs.
Oh yeah,
Instead of developing scale-out applications, they are paying F5 huge money.
Right. No, that's right.
To fix all other problems with load balancing. Instead of implementing security or owning security, you have firewall rules with I don't know how many 10,000 firewall with 10,000 rules.
Or 400 firewalls.
Yeah. Instead of building proper networks, we have VLAN, we have Trill, we have SPD, we have OTB, we have every stupidity ever invented. Just so that someone can move his precious VM from here.
I'm tweeting that.
Someone please create a GIF of that.
Their code network into our labs, and then everyone is complaining that infrastructure is rich. Of course it is. We're burdened with other people's complexity.
No,
how are we going to fix that?
Well, I think there's two things. One for sure is that there's a whole lot of legacy applications, and you know what, new applications are still being written that are legacy, to be very clear. So and what I, you know, that's uppercase L and lowercase l, including the ones that are being written today. You know, we are seeing, I mean, this is one of the interesting things, as you move towards cloud and understanding cloud applications, we are seeing a broader understanding in the software development community as to what it means to build scale-out applications.
Not necessarily.
But I mean,
yeah, absolutely necessarily.
No, I'll tell you a great counterexample. I had someone who is actually moving from Amazon into his own data center. And so he was talking about layer 2 demotion between two data centers. I was like, hey dude,
yeah,
you have a cloud app.
You don't want to do that.
And now you want to do this?
Yeah, you don't want to do that.
You know why? Because on Amazon, he was relying on their MySQL service, which is redundant. And going back to his own cloud, he had one MySQL server because the app coders forgot that you have to code 2 SQL servers in the connect string. So that SQL server was so precious, he wanted to move it around.
Yeah, I mean, but there again, now that's an interesting case because I would say in that case the infrastructure, the database infrastructure isn't providing the fundamentals of what they need in that environment.
No,
You need, you know, it's...
developers forgot what they need to code for resilience.
By the way, what you described there, especially as you go from, by the way, Amazon's a DevOps model, just ops happens to work in Seattle. Right, it's not your ops, it's no ops. But as you do bring your application, seriously, this is, by the way, union busting. One thing CIOs do to get rid of IT. Move your app externally, break the unions. Not actual unions, but you know, your network engineering union, your storage engineering union, the people who don't add value to the business. And I'm a CCIA, I can say that. But absolutely, the value of an operations guy, a network engineer, a manufacturer that's allowing that interacts close with your development team is there's a systems engineer that understands, and Robert's nodding there. There's a systems engineer that probably understands. Okay, we're at Amazon right now. Okay, we need something that looks like Amazon. Maybe OpenStack Cloud Stack, who cares? Maybe we'll use Red Dwarf or Scalar to scale out the database layer there. There's value to systems administration, network and architecture in that space. They just had built their application stack without IT ops.
Well, I mean, what organization, the last few enterprises I've worked in, it is rare to see those teams talk to each other.
So actually that is
It's like, you know, I was a pariah at the last organization I worked at because I wanted to talk about the networking and security with the VM guys. I know. They wanted to burn me, you know, at the stake. It's just, you're seen as, it's frightening to them and it's...
And the walls come down slowly. The walls come down slowly.
Way too slowly. I mean, how long has VMware been around?
Actually, you know, I wrote another rant how networking should really become a utility. So the app people actually take care of their own security because the utility would never install your circuit breakers. And I got a few responses saying, you know what? In my organization, actually, we all agree with that. I'm fine with it. The apps people are fine with it. The server people know what a firewall is. They're fine with it. But the managers don't let go.
They're not necessary.
Everyone is protecting the...
But that's why it is, to some extent, a bottoms-up discussion as well as a C-suite down, because in order to drive business agility and get the, you know, lots of the companies, it's not just the emerging companies. I mean, you know, we talked to a pretty legacy insurance company, and in order to break that barrier, essentially the CIO formed a Tiger team with a cross-functional group of 17 people. Only 2 of them were essentially the traditional network guys, but essentially they were the guys that were helping define the next gen application strategy. And it will start with, just like we've made network transitions before, it's not throw it all away and start again. It's let that run your business today. We've got to milk it. It's already sunk cost. Where we invest moving forward strategically has to be in the new model. And that may start out very small, and it has to work well and support my business with no downtime. The wheels still need to keep running on the train.
I think you called...
I would say for those kind of guys, they don't really know what the new situation is going to be. You need a solution which is going to be giving them really building blocks to really, you know, address new use cases. Programmability in general is actually the ability to run a different third-party code in there. It's going back to what she was talking about really gives you a building block and step in the right direction, right? For you to kind of actually start to build and being more application aware.
So let's try to tie it back to, you made a key point here, and I want to tie it back to Juniper's offerings in this space. That in this shift to organizational restructuring, which is DevOps, and IT or software development operations alignment, you're calling out, you've seen executive sponsorship, seen tiger teams, alignment into new applications being released. Can you describe some of the examples of the interactions you've had as employees of Juniper, working with your customer base, those C-levels, helping those C-levels deploy their next-gen applications integrated with the Juniper platforms?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start. There is a very good example with an overseas financial services company who actually is doing an OpenStack deployment, and they're starting essentially with internal mobile application development. And they're enabling their own internal mobile application developers. So this is net new budget, it's a major priority at the top level of the company, and essentially, initially 3,000 servers for their mobile application developers to drive.
Instances or physical servers?
The counted number is physical servers, but obviously many more are virtual instances.
Sure.
But essentially, they had this problem already. So the last couple of years, they were banging their head against the wall in terms of IT, and especially the network piece was in the way. So they essentially said the safe environment to essentially get this going is our own private cloud for mobile application development. However, from day one, that private cloud needs to be defined such that it can be a hybrid scenario, because we know as the mobile applications need to access data, let's say in AWS or some other public or one of our ecosystem partners, or as we make this available to our business partners, we can't lock ourselves into our own private cloud. So that's where, even though it may not be deployed as a hybrid scenario for many years, they know that that path needs to be planned now. And that's why it is a higher level discussion than just, what is the CLI to configure it today? Because we believe, at least as Contrail, the technology, we do want to make sure that we're taking very deliberate incremental steps. We're not saying we're going to change the world tomorrow, or that we're not trying to beat our chest about how many large-scale deployments are out there, but this is a big change for the industry, and we're in discussions where it's not the same buying center, it's not the same budget, et cetera. And so that's a very good example. That happened to be in financial services, but mobility, cloud, and the need to mine legacy data as well as new data analytics, which may be in AWS, does drive this discussion and puts the network back into the center of it, which is, I think, why it's a big opportunity.
And we're seeing the same kinds of conversations with service providers as well. Their challenge is a little different, because what they're looking to do is provide services to their customers, network services to their customers. And they are restrained by the rigidity of the existing network infrastructure to allow them to do that, and their ability to deploy things quickly. And in some cases, there are some applications that are very, very well suited to these SDN architectures. And there again, we see this combination of executive sponsorship helping to drive this, because they see the needs, and then having some champions within the organization. But I will also tell you that from what I've seen, there is still a lot of resistance inside these organizations to these new infrastructure, because they're simply not used to actually running things this way. So it's, there's definite tension in that environment. I think it's the same tension that we were talking about earlier, with the different silos inside IT. I think it's basically.
I remember this. I get flashbacks, right, from the mid to late '90s. Not those flashbacks. We can have a whole other roundtable.
Those two.
But yeah, that's a really fun roundtable. It's at the club tonight. But anyways, but I remember the transition from client server, or from mainframe to client server apps.
Yeah. Right.
And we kind of had the old guys wore ties. Right. You don't see those COBOL programmers anymore. By the way, if you know COBOL, contact me. Yeah. The rates you have to pay are amazingly high. But because no one knows anymore, they're dead, right? And so I remember this application shift to client server, right? And actually a decentralization of IT of IT spend into the business. Remember those work group file servers?
Now we're back there again with VDI.
Oh no! But I mean, take the VDI is that old antiquated technology. I mean, I I remember using Citrix WinFrame. Come on, okay, we just put a desktop wrapper around it. But the point I'm making is that, and there's people. I'm not that old, right? There's people that remember that transition, how the old systems teams they wouldn't shift, or remember the PBX teams used to be.
But it does shift, though. I mean, I ran SQL Server for Microsoft at that point in time, so I was right in the middle of that client server transition. It does shift. It does shift.
You know what, those people have to die.
Or retire, yes. The shift.
I prefer to say retired, but that's.
But no,
Well, it's not a bad idea.
what I'm saying is that sometimes it's.
Their jobs are not necessary.
I'm shocked by how many of those people are still there and holding on really
Yes,
tight.
the quickest shift is through retirement or attrition. Changing people's minds about things.
Well, no, but let's call it
very
out.
difficult.
In a world where now your systems, when your network topologies, the functions and features of your network are now contained in source code, tightly coupled with your application, the value that your business needs is not knowing what CLI to type into JunoS. The value that they need is knowing how to integrate those network features and functions into the application deployment lifecycle. Need less people.
Totally agree.
In my last job, there was a great guy who he had taken like 2 years off. He had worked at a big service provider, and he got totally burned out. And he taught himself. He started getting into SDN, taught himself programming.
Awesome.
And he said, "I don't even care about CLI anymore. I don't want to learn the commands." And honestly, that's the same way I worked at a place where you had to manage each firewall in CLI. I went, ew, no, I don't care.
Well, I mean, this is one of those things where I came to Juniper and I looked at these CLIs and I'm like, oh my god, I can't believe it. And you're looking at.
Well, since you are coming from Microsoft, you point out that Microsoft is more and more using PowerShell.
Yes. We needed, I mean, to be clear, we needed a scripting environment. We needed a scripting environment, which is why we needed PowerShell. But the usage and the way that CLIs are being done in the network, particularly to manage each of the distributed elements as a very independent entity, is really the broken thing. I mean, it's not even so much it's the CLI. I mean, you know whether Juno scripting is great or not great is not really what matters. The real issue is the style and approach to management and the idea that you're managing all of these distributed elements independently. And that's got to go away. It's kind of the first step in it's the basics of
and as a shout out to old Unix engineers, I mean, we figured this out like way, and so.
No, Unix I think is one of the best. We figured it out way earlier than we did at Microsoft.
So I used to, so I have this analogy that I think IT is like Planet of the Apes, the caste system there. And I've always thought that network engineers are like the gorillas in Planet of the Apes, and that Unix engineers are more like the chimpanzees, they're smarter. And so...
They look like the problem is they look like the orangutans.
But so they figured it out, and so I moved from Unix to networking, and got stuck with security because those weren't the real network appliances. And I was just horrified at how primitive, you controlled the network. And I'm like, really? God, you don't even have a cron job that you do the equivalent of that?
The real problem has been for the last 15 years that no one in this industry knows what the people actually need, and no one can write network management software. Because we had all the tools forever. I mean, if you go over there at Tail F booth, and sorry for talking about someone, third party, they actually had a system where you describe your services in Yang, you describe your devices and their CLI or what they have, NetConf, CLI, in Unity. In Yang, then you define the middleware, what needs to be done, and they can do ACID transactions on the network at service deployment time using not SDN RESTful API, not OpenFlow, but CLI and NetConf.
Right.
It can be done.
It can be done. It's just not being done yet.
Yeah, exactly. And what does everyone think that the new magical buzzword, three-letter buzzword with some unicorn dust will now solve all
I was
the
going
problems?
to say that. It was on the back of a unicorn.
Well, no, I will say that networks at scale are commonly deployed through either the configurations are created programmatically and then handed to a union member to type it in, right? And by the way, I'm talking about, they're not generally IT unions unless state of California. The Secretary's Union, by the way, is the IT organization. But that's not a joke. But the fact is that networks at scale are commonly programmatically created. Now, some of them use middleware layers. You know, we see this a lot in the service provider space.
But they're commonly programmatically created, but they are uniquely programmatically created. In other words, that the burden is falling on the customers to have to do this, where I think that's just completely inappropriate. The system should be, the vendors ought to be able to supply this, which is, we're doing this. We're stepping up and doing it. I think we're late in doing it, but I'm glad we're doing it.
Honestly, the problem is that everyone thinks his own network is unique.
You're a unique special flower. Enjoy your diversity.
So my network is so different from my neighbor's network that we couldn't possibly use the same boxes, the same design, the same configuration, even though we both have 4 switches.
Yeah. I'm sure your network is just as unique as everybody else's.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's what's stopping vendors.
I think this one does change because the scale and scope of what people are trying to do is reached a point where it is no longer humanly controllable, and the cost associated with it is out of control. I think ultimately those are the things that drive a change in behavior, is when the old behavior is no longer suiting, it is no longer achieving what you need to do.
Well, there's also a platform shift, and I really like your opinion on what you're seeing. Obviously, you do a lot of service provider stuff with Juniper. That was me being sarcastic. Of course they do. Right. So I mean, we're in the middle of the. I remember the transition from TDM to ATM, and the transition from ATM to MPLS. We're kind of in the midst of this transition of IP optical convergence as well as SDN technologies in the service provider space. I almost see this as a catalyst. I mean, say it's a hardware refresh. Anytime you do a hardware refresh, there's a lot of programmability to get your gear into the wild. Do you guys feel that the hardware refresh or platform refresh to support lower cost of adding services and service provider will be a catalyst?
Well, I think the big one on that though is not so much the hardware refresh; it's the need to move those services outside of the box to be able to get the agility that you need. I mean, that's the thing that's been really a big problem, certainly for service providers, is the ability for them to respond quickly because of their need to upgrade the entire operating system environment whenever they change a service. I mean, it's an absurd thing to do, right? You don't when you deploy a new application, you don't install a new operating system in a server-based world, and that's what we force them to do in the networking world.
No, absolutely.
So
I mean,
that's what's going to shift that, I think, in the service providers.
Oh, I can comment on that. The problem is that networking companies can't sell software.
We're focused on changing that.
I think
really appreciate that.
I think Colin makes an interesting point though, because forklifting your network is painful, right? Everybody's done it. Everyone knows it's hard. SDN could not necessarily fix that first generation, but think of the second generation of forklifting.
Well, but I also do think that, and so I'll loop right back to that CI discussion, that a lot of the gap that I see is IT operational process mapping in a software development process. And if you can't manage your distributed system in a programmatic way, right? Check in type in the config, check it into source code, have it automatically regression tested and deployed into production, right? If you can't manage that pipeline, you're not ready. But at the same time, when you're doing whether forklift or not, there's obviously a value creation event service provider, right? For being able to insert additional services, go with the quintuple play instead of the triple play. I think I'm not alone in seeing that shift, as well as seeing better utilization of the backhaul links.
Yeah.
That's a money game where absolutely it's worth learning to
You
code.
all have to keep in mind that what you have in mind are the top 1% customers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So when you say that complexity is so large that no one can manage that, yes, those are the Facebooks, Googles, Verizons of the world. What is out there are people with 10 switches.
Well, pause for a moment there, and I just off the top of my head, I think IP, and sorry about bringing up another networking vendor, but IP Next Generation Network, which is like 39% of another vendor's number, so roughly in the market, you're probably talking, and you guys are more experts than I am, just a nerd, 30+% of networking spend is housed in service provider. I think that's significant.
Is it 30% of customers?
No,
Or
of spin.
30% of
Well, that's because their network is their business. I mean, there's a different
Hardware.
level of, that's why north of 60% of our revenue is service provider
Yeah.
revenue. But it
So
depends
it's
on
kind
who
of
you sell
relevant to
to.
Juniper.
I mean, your point is well taken. I mean, I agree with you that the challenges are different for the service providers of the world or the Goldman Sachs and Morgans than they are for the majority of what enterprises
You
do.
believe the size of the third products I've seen. You're saying the big one.
No, we see both. To be fair, we see
There
both.
are
And
really
we
small
sell across the world, right? We
Yeah.
sell, we sell in very small geographies, and so we sell all across the world. But the service providers do, what will happen is the large ones set up topologies and the small ones tend to follow over time there. And I think the same thing happens in the enterprise as well. I mean, we saw virtualization happen really first in larger enterprises, and then it sort of drifted down over time.
Actually, it happens on both.
Yeah, it's fair.
It happens in really small ones and really large ones.
Well, the other dynamic there, though, is that especially with something like cloud computing, I mean, the economies of scale are things that the large guys can realize and capitalize on. So, I mean, if you take Telefonica or even a smaller carrier, most of their business is with, SMB type customers, right? So because they can get those economies of scale and because the SMBs don't have large IT shops. So when we say, if you look at sort of the route to market, yes, a lot of our spend comes from direct service provider, but many of them, their growth areas are in growing their managed services
And
faster.
one thing about the cloud is that the companies that will move to the cloud broadly first are small businesses.
Totally agree.
And so we'll see, we're going to see the infrastructure investments that small and medium-sized businesses have made traditionally over time shifting to be services that they acquire through some public cloud vendor.
Yes.
And so that's that transition we've really never seen. I mean, that's a fairly new transition that I think is enabled because of the capacity of networks. I mean, you could never trust it. I mean, the reality was even 5 years, in some geos around the world, you still can't trust it. But in Europe, in the United States, and parts of Asia, you can trust the reliability and capacity of the network to allow you to move your business to that environment.
Yeah, but then you've got the security shortcuts coming in.
Well,
Hey, put in some jump points.
But that is also the opportunity for the large guys because it's essentially, yeah.
Michelle, actually, if you move a small business to the cloud, their security improves.
Yeah.
I think in general, that's a very good picture for most small shops.
I agree with you.
I think in general. And the thing is with small.
We're going to take a quick pause. We need.
Camera change?
Yeah.
Okay.
Change out.
Yeah, I actually think we're also out of time. Are we? I know I'm out of time.
You're out.
I got
I wanted to ask you about your open daylight contributions.
Well, I can say it briefly. I mean, you can also chip with them. We're contributing XMPP and the source code around the data model of XMPP. That's our first contribution to Open Daylight. We're platinum member. We're watching what happens. It's an interesting situation. It'll be interesting to see how it evolves.
Huh?
What?
Do you see Open Daylight as the new IETF?
Well, but I think, back to Ivan's comment before, how do you abstract this at the level that it's not individual CLI? So, two things. One, our implementation of XMPP to say we want to get to a real-time message bus that essentially drives the network as a system and then presents the network as a service at a higher level. How are we doing that on a scalable basis that is standards-based? The other piece is the XSD data model. So the data model for the network abstraction, and that's a discussion that networking folks have not been good at. We'd like to be contributing that very actively because we've thought about that quite a bit.
I got to run, but thanks a lot, guys. This has been very
so
helpful. This has been very good.
We get the hook.
conversation. Thanks.